Greetings and welcome to the podcast that explores the full potential of the East of England. This is Eastern Promise. I'm Mike Rigby, and thank you so much for joining me for this jam-packed bumper edition of Eastern Promise. This week, we'll hear more from Sarah Steed, Director of Innovation and Engagement at Norwich University of the Arts, NUA. I'll also be talking to Regeneration guru Jackie Sadek on her do's and don'ts of urban renewal, her time working in central government, and why fortune favours the bold when it comes to bidding for central government funding. Norwich University of the Arts has had a profoundly positive impact on the regeneration of Norwich, adopting, restoring or replacing vacant and obsolete buildings, thus proving that urban development and the arts go hand in hand. And finally, let's check in and pitch our tent in the field of excellence as you share your recommendations for an East Anglian weekend getaway in CROWDSOURCERY. We all meet remarkable people as we shuttle through life, and this week I'm delighted to have not one, but two of them on Eastern Promise. We'll hear more from Director of Innovation and Engagement at Norwich University of the Arts, Sarah Steed, later in the show, including on the huge role that NUA is playing in the regeneration of the Norwich cityscape. And to that point, you won't find a more authoritative and straight-talking voice on regeneration than Jackie Sadek. Jackie has over 30 years' experience in property, specialising in public-private sector partnerships. From 2014 to 2016, Jackie was the government's specialist advisor on urban regeneration, and she works closely with former and now current Levelling Up Housing and Community Secretary Greg Clark, and especially Lord Heseltine. She's the founder and chief operating officer of UK Regeneration, and she's also tremendous fun.
There he is.
There I am, and there you are.
Indeed.
Hello, how are you?
I'm all right. I mean, you know, we live in interesting times, Mike, don't we? We live in interesting times.
Don't we just?
Right, love, so what are we doing?
Well, what we'll do is we'll just crack on. The first question I was going to ask you about is what makes successful generation. And I know, and I know you know far better than I, that there's always lots of people with lots of great ideas. And if they only spent less time being like that and more time actually saying, okay, how can we make the best of this? It would work brilliantly. And I've seen it in Norfolk and in Suffolk and other places. So what is it? What's the X factor for regeneration?
Well, I don't think I could have put it any better than the way you put it in your question, actually. I have to say, I worked, as you know, with Bill Grimsey, the veteran retailer,
yes,
on all four. Oh, and God, he goes at 100 miles an hour, you know, and what great fun he is to work with. But I worked with him on all four of his reviews, which were very, very highly regarded and market-facing, externally facing, and always working with the grain of human behaviour. And in all four reviews, one of the central tenet that comes out is you need one plan, one strategy, one organisation, and one leader. We had to really fight with Bill to stop him from trying to get involved in local government reorganisation as a result of this, because once he realised how fractious local government could be on occasions, you know, it becomes quite fraught. You asked me what are the success factors for a successful regeneration project. I have to say, Ipswich probably has them all. It's an hour out of London, as we know, with very good transport connections. It's got a waterfront. You know, how many towns would die for a waterfront, give their IT for a waterfront? Christchurch Park is magnificent. It is a triumph. We want to green the rest of Ipswich, pull Christchurch Park down into the rest of the town. You know, what a fun, and it's underpriced, Mike.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so Ipswich has got everything going for it, let alone all the rest of the stuff, the art story, Cardinal Wolsey. You know, I'm not trying to be funny here. If you were American, if this was an American town and if it was an American town and had Cardinal Wolsey, it would be a global tourist destination by now. Now, you know, you look at what you've got in Ipswich, which is arguably the oldest town in England. You look at its heritage assets, you look at its history, you look at its beautiful streetscape, and you think, well, it's just got everything going for it.
I mean, obviously, in my previous life, I was focused on Norfolk, and I've loved getting out there into Suffolk and meeting new people. To shout out to the Epicentre at Haverhill and BT at Martlesham. When you say about one leader, does that mean just necessarily someone like a mayor, or can it just mean one person out front? We've chosen you, get out there.
The latter. I mean, I have a great relationship with David Ellesmere, who is the elected leader, as you know, of Ipswich Borough Council. You know, he's got a huge amount to do in terms of managing, you know, services throughout Ipswich which aren't to do with regeneration. But what I am saying is that somebody has to be the leader for the plan, the regeneration, the inward investment strategy, and the local economic development.
We need to do less hiding, though. That's where I hope I can start to come in. But I was just doing some reading around this, and the number of things sort of coming out from the government ending in the word fund, and it's like the High Streets Fund, the Towns Fund, the Levelling Up Fund, the Future High Streets Fund, and I did some reading around at the What Works Centre for Local Economic Growth, who tell us, rather unsurprisingly, places want to spend their funding on the things most likely to support sustained economic growth. Okay, well, at the risk of stating the obvious. So what does that mean in terms of somewhere like Ipswich and the wider east of England, and just generally in your experience?
Well, as you know, I spent a lot of time working in central government, and I have to say, I was very gratified to discover that my hunch, which had been born of 30 years of working in urban regeneration, was entirely correct. My hunch was this: if you've got a plan and a good strategy and everybody in agreement and everybody working in the same team, and if you're prepared to deliver jobs and homes, then the money will come, right? So I would go at it the other way round than the way that's normally gone at it. So what happens at the moment is, as you say rightly, you've got it, you've hit the nail on the head. You've got these relentless, exhausting rounds of bidding for funds, whatever they're called, you know, Town Deal Fund, Levelling Up Fund, as you say. I mean, relentless. You know, there's forever a letter coming out of the department, you know, inviting you to bid for whatever. And local government tends to behave a bit like Pavlov's dogs, you know, and kind of think, oh, right, there's something to bid for, we better bid, right? And actually, that, I think, is the wrong way round. I think what you've got to have is a big old plan ready. And then as the bidding rounds come up, I think you've got to work out which bit of the big plan you've got this particular round of funds could help with. So I take a big leaf out of Howard Bernstein's book on all of this stuff. Howard Bernstein, as you know, famously would meet with his 10 other Manchester local authorities. I think there was 10 of them in total. You know, so Manchester City is actually quite small. So he was obviously chief executive of that. But the other chief executives would all meet on a Friday morning, and they would agree who was going to be the lead bid person for whichever round of funding was coming up, but it would all be within the context of an overall Greater Manchester plan. And I thought that was incredibly clever. And in 35, God, I'm getting so old, Mike, in 35 years of working in urban regeneration, I have discovered that actually, if you just get on and start to deliver, the money will follow. Yeah. And I think if you just start to think that way, if you start to think about joining up in a team and looking for a strategy for growth, I think you will find government, I mean, they'll never throw money at you, but they'll certainly reward success. They want results. They need housing numbers. If you're prepared to put your hand up and say, yes, I'm up for clean, green, inclusive growth, then you will get rewarded. It's my solemn contention.
No, absolutely. I mean, one of the things that when I've worked in these areas that has kind of frustrated me is that when people talk about an ask and not an offer, and I just want to say, no, never say the word ask, because, you know, they'll go, oh, yes, it's, you know, how much?
No,
offer, it's like, boom, what we can do for you.
Spot on. You're spot on. It's a deal, isn't it? It's an offer. It's a partnership. I mean, you're absolutely spot on. I mean, one of the things I would really rail against is this kind of culture of being supplicant.
Yes.
You know, you go along, you say, oh, I've got my little begging bowl out, and I've got, and no, sorry, that's not how it's going to be, And I think you're absolutely right. I think things have got to be phrased in terms of the offer and what is the deal.
Do you find, and this is a thing that's concerned me for years and years and years, but there was a phrase that I coined that was basically vision collision, that basically there's local people, a local community have a vision for their area, but when it starts to rub up against what might be the political imperatives of a local authority at either tier, then that's when things get jammed up and nothing happens. Do you recognise that, and if you do, how do you fight against it?
Well, I sort of recognise it. What I thought you were going to ask me was whether I thought there were too much strategy than papers and any town worth their salt, you'll find an awful lot of kind of verbiage floating around, feasibility studies, strategies, research, this, that, the other. And it's almost like an excuse to not do delivery. Is you write a report, you don't have to do any delivery. And one of the things I'm quite keen on is kind of distilling out, perhaps into a spreadsheet, dare I say, God, that's a bit rash, the 10 things that you could do, and then delivering against those 10, or it might be the 5 things you can do and delivering against those 5. And so that's really why I would say you've got to be in one grouping and you've got to articulate one narrative. And I think if that happened, you wouldn't get what you've just described. I actually have to say it's rather good vision collision. I might steal that.
Steal away.
I'm not stealing so much as sharing best practice.
I thank you. I thank you.
Yes.
That's the first time that's been said to me.
Very good.
What's the patented Jackie Sadek way of boosting demand in an urban centre?
Well, it's not rocket science, love. I mean, not to put too fine a point on it. I'm a great believer in PR. Sorry, but there it is, and thank you, Mike Rigby, for doing your part here. That's very helpful of you. Thank you very much. It's all part of my cunning plan, of course. I'm a great believer in PR. As you know, I write for the Estates Gazette. The property industry from which I come, in the main, I'm an urban regeneration practitioner, but I have, I'm pretty well steeped in the property industry. The property industry from which I come is always looking for new pastures. And the other thing they like to be is an early adopter of a new pasture. So, once we get feet under the table but once the feet are under the table and we feel comfortable with it, well, I will just start inviting people to come and visit. The property industry, which is where I'd start because I come from there. Inward investors, there's a huge amount of opportunities with things like pension funds. Always looking for stuff to do. And taking another leaf out of the Manchester book, I was always very keen on the Evergreen Fund, which you may recall Howard Bernstein set up, which he set up with my old employer, actually, CBRE. Mm-hmm. And I'm very close to CBRE still, and they still have this wonderful capability. He put a lot of Manchester assets into this thing called the Evergreen Fund, and the market loved it, absolutely responded to it. I guess I'm looking at property interest, inward investment interest. I'm looking at setting up some sort of fund. I've already started the work with Homes England. They've got a thing called the English Cities Fund, which they've set up with Muse. And there's a lot of money out there that's looking for a home.
There is. I mean, that's something that was always said when I was working in small p politics, that there was lots of money. You just had to know how to go about getting it. And one of the things I actually you've again prompted me to ask you is a question I asked George Freeman, which was there tends to be a view, certainly in North, especially in Norfolk and probably Suffolk too, that everyone just sees the east of England as being Cambridge, and everyone goes, oh, well, the minute people get successful, they just bugger off to Cambridge. And I think what's wrong with that is it treats it as a zero-sum game, that Cambridge wins, we all lose. And I just wanted take your view on that, really.
Well, I agree with every word of that. And I think both Ipswich and Norwich are totally undersung stories, and ought to be up there competing with Cambridge, and aren't at the moment. And I totally agree with you. One of the things that came across to me loud and clear when I was working in central government and working with the likes of you out in East Anglia, and as you know, I did a lot of work with the LEP and with Norfolk, Suffolk communities and leaders. One of the things that came across to me loud and clear is what an undersung story it is. We've already rehearsed that ad nauseum, but also that you hadn't had any recession during the financial crash of 2008. I thought this most extraordinary piece of information, that actually Norfolk and Suffolk in particular, but obviously Cambridgeshire as well, but Norfolk and Suffolk in particular are so resilient,
yes,
that actually you hadn't had any knock-on recession from the financial crash, which absolutely hobbled. I mean, London was on its knees, you know, and I thought that was the most extraordinary piece of information. And I began to look at East Anglia very, very differently, because even though actually I had my first job in Norwich, and I lived and owned my first home in Norwich, and lived there for a whole year, working for Reckitt and Coleman, or Coleman's of Norwich as it was. I'm really showing my age now. I went past there the other day. And the site is still sitting there, but it's a to die for site. But I looked at all the places, all the buildings I used to work in. It was quite, anyway, sitting there dark and derelict. But anyway, there we are. I mean, I always had this kind of image, even though I'd lived in Norwich, of East Anglia being, you know, very kind of rustic and rural and a bit of a backwater. I had never taken on quite how affluent it is and quite how resilient it is. Yeah. And therefore, I mean, bringing it back to Ipswich, you know, how much Ipswich, not to put too fine a point in it, and I'm sorry, I'm going to use this word, is underperforming. Yeah. Because, you know, Ipswich should be to Suffolk as Norwich is to Norfolk, and it isn't. And the fixation with Cambridge, as you say, is not doing any of us any good at all. And what I'd really like to do is to shine up these assets, you know, Ipswich and Norwich, you know, and present them first and foremost as the opportunity. Cambridge is incredibly constrained. You know this. There's no more building you can do. It's got its green belt. It's got transport problems. It's got all sorts of problems. You know, it's got all sorts of opportunities as well, but it's got all sorts of. We could do an awful lot more growth out in Ipswich and Norwich than you could do in Cambridge, and I think that's, you know, there's all to play for there, really.
You'll obviously know about the changes to permitted development rights to make conversion of vacant properties to residential developments. Is your point of view that this is what we have to do to, you know, pull against that, or is it more sort of, it is what it is, what do we do now? I mean, the RIBA, Royal Institute of British Architects, Chartered Institute of Builders, I'm just reading the list here, Royal Institute of Chartered Surveyors, all protested about it. What's your feeling about the change, and what can be done now it's gone through?
Well, it's a complicated question. I mean, the first thing I want to say is getting homes into town centres is generally a pretty good idea. And certainly getting upper floors of town centres into use is a pretty good idea for all sorts of reasons that you understand. I would be very keen indeed, and this comes through the Bill Grimsey work, to have a core of the town centre which would have as its ground floor always either retail or community use, you know, some sort of use which is town centre use. But, you know, the problem I've got with the PDR stuff, the community development stuff, is it's a very, very, very blunt instrument. I mean, you know, any decent conversion project would have got planning permission anyway, you know, but what PDR does is it signals to the property industry that you can go like wildfire through town centres, just converting stuff willy-nilly to residential, and sometimes not very well. And then it's got all the knock-on effect of, you know, bin collections and and how do you service your retail alongside your homes, and it's very, very, very fraught. And one of the things about being an urban regeneration practitioner is that you learn that it isn't enough to have your town centre a proper mix of uses, properly thought through and all the rest of it, you've also got to have a management strategy. And what PDR does, not to put too fine a point in it, is blow a hole through your management strategy, because then your deliveries and your, you know, all the... So in the main, because it's so blunt an instrument and because it sends such a terrible signal to my industry, which frankly, property industry doesn't need any encouragement to be rapacious, frankly, so for all those reasons, I am opposed to the PDR. I am with RIBA and the others in being opposed to PDR as it's currently formulated. Having said that, the principle of converting redundant space into residential, I've got no problem with at all. But as we've seen some pretty terrible results of so-called residential units, which frankly, you know, are not fit for human habitation, that have come out of the PDR stuff. And I really don't think it's the way to go. And I would resist it for Ipswich Town Centre in particular, which I think is very fine. I would be quite resistant of PDR, and certainly as applied as it stands. Now, you say to me, well, are we, you know, we are where we are, and is it worth fighting? I'm sympathetic to that view. You can't fight on every front at once, and you know, you've got to choose your battlegrounds. But at the end of the day, I would hope that, you know, sense would prevail and that we could potentially get an Article 14 direction or some sort of conservation principle enshrined in Ipswich, so that we don't end up with rapacious developers churning out what is not a good product. Yeah. Sorry, that's a slightly long answer.
No,
but,
not
you know,
at all.
I haven't got a problem with the generality of getting people living in town centres. What I'd like it to be done is I'd like it to be done sensitively.
Yeah, no, it's you know, it's one thing to you know, fix a picture on the wall and you know, and it's another thing to try and fix it on the wall with a sledgehammer.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. You're there. Yeah.
So the What Works Centre also found that there's surprising little evidence for the idea of anchor stores in town centres being more important than other shops and premises, and they call into question the public sector intervention to prevent anchor stores closing. And I just wanted to take your view on that.
Well, I mean, they may be onto something. I mean, actually, you might be opening yourself to real vulnerability, actually, if you are dependent on a couple of anchor stores to underpin to anchor your town centre. You look at the example of Poundbury, which is hugely successful. The reason it's hugely successful as a town centre is because it's got a lot of little tiny units that are let on very, very cheap rents to independents. I mean, another good example is Cork. Cork has got, I just happen to know this because I was asked to go over there and give a lecture, and I was completely blown away. Cork has got 600 independent retailers, independent retail units let to independent little tiny micro businesses, and therefore has this incredible resilience. Now, I think actually anchor stores might actually open you up to being, well, vulnerable. Yeah. Whereas a plethora of tiny stores with independent owner occupiers, that's the way to go. That's what gives you resilience. So I would be quite inclined to agree with the guys. I think they're onto something.
Yeah, absolutely. Obviously, you've got experience of dealing with whatever I think it's the Department for Levelling Up Housing and Communities this week.
Well said.
And Michael Gove, when he's got out of the lift, he'll lay his benediction upon me. What's the realities of that sort of first engagement when you're a town team that doesn't have sort of your firepower on board? I mean, you hinted earlier that a lot of the problems is sort of people, sort of fractious relationships within project teams, but do people sort of run out of impetus when they actually have to deal with central government?
Funny enough, if it's constructed right, then central government ought to come in and give a location a bit of a shot in the arm, rather than come in and kind of de-skill them and make them feel small or humble. It should be the other way around. You know, you should get your senior civil servant, or even, dare I say, your junior minister coming in and giving the thing a bit of a push. Yeah. A little bit of encouragement. And certainly when I was in the department, which was at that point called rather humbly the Department for Communities and Local Government. In the Cities and Local Growth team, which is where I was sort of mainly active, certainly they were about the only team of civil servants I knew that got out enough. And certainly their role was to get into towns and to encourage and to nurture and to cherish what was there and to and give people hints as to what they could do better and differently. But it does keep going back to the same old refrain. If number one, if people aren't working together, then there's not a lot you can do from central government to help, really, if people aren't in a team. And number two, if any part of the team, be it the college or the job centre or the whoever it is, if any part of the team is underperforming, you've got to try and fix that internally before you can expect the central government to come and help you out. You can't, to my eternal pride, I spent a lot of time when I was working in government going around the country with Greg Clark and Lord Heseltine doing what was called the LEP Challenge process. We would go into locations and talk about what the LEP was going to do. And Lord Heseltine in particular would start to drill down immediately on what he immediately perceived as failings. So we were in one conurbation when he turned around, he said, "You've got an awful lot of roundabouts. There's too many roundabouts." And it was absolutely spot on. Too many roundabouts in this town, which are just derelict bits of land in the middle of the town, which frankly should all be repurposed. You need them all straightened out. You need them all sorted out by transport planners, and you would liberate a lot of land for housing, and you wouldn't have anything like that. And it was stuff like this, and he would go in very, very hard. Do not expect us to give you money as a central government if your schools are underperforming and that's on your watch. You've got to sort this out.
Yeah.
Fair play, frankly. And it's not rocket science,
No.
Mike. It just takes a little bit of expertise. You don't need, it doesn't have to be expensive. You just have to start thinking through this stuff, really. And, I have to say, I learned a lot from Lord Heseltine. I learned a lot.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, Greg would be much more kind of polite, and Greg and introduce and be very sort of emollient.
Yes.
And then Lord H would just come in and give it them with both barrels, and it was extraordinary double act. I mean, it really was quite wonderful.
Good cop, bad cop.
Quite wonderful. Well, and Greg's such an intellectual powerhouse.
He is, yes.
And they were such a great team. I mean, they were such a great team together. I mean, Michael's much more instinctive, but it was such a great. It was a great privilege to watch them in action. It was really good, really, really Fantastic.
Good. It's always a pleasure to speak to Jackie, and my huge thanks go to her for making the time to chat with me. Previously on Eastern Promise.
They call me the Director of Innovation and Engagement, but what it means actually is that I'm very concerned with all of the things that happen to our graduates after they leave us. At a kind of a rebuilding of the economy level, we know that our graduates of courses like fine art, illustration, textile design, fashion, lots of our courses are part of this kind of cultural rebuild of what the region is. We're very involved in the way that we want to use our city in the future. They can be sitting in Norfolk and working in Toronto or working in New York or Chicago. It makes no difference. And, so in those kind of industries, their opportunity is it's international now. That's fantastic for them. I think what it is, and I think what the region does particularly well, is the way that we network and the way that we pull together to make these things happen.
Now, let's rejoin Norwich University of the Arts' Sarah Steed. I had a really good look at the stuff put out by various sort of academic associations and bodies, particularly around the roles of universities and creative universities in particular in regeneration. New teaching and new student buildings. I mean, anyone who's going through Norwich now can see this. What a fantastic job Newer has done of bringing the public space into much sort of better, brighter, shinier use. The Ideas Factory, I think, was probably just the start. New teaching and student buildings, regenerating Norwich, breathing life into previously the derelict or slightly down at heel spaces. And what that really requires, as you'll know, is a positive dialogue between the university and so many other actors, local authorities, people like the Norwich Society. How do you and how do Newer navigate those relationships? Because it's not easy. I speak from experience.
It's a really interesting question. I mean, I think the first thing to say about the way that our part of the city has been regenerated is that in our Deputy Vice-Chancellor, Angela Robson, we have had a true visionary in this space. She's got that knack that not everybody has, which is about being able to look at spaces like that and imagine what they could potentially be. I mean, you're right, we did the Ideas Factory. We've got obviously our core buildings there, which are, very much sort of heritage exteriors, but, you've been in them, the most fantastic contemporary interiors, which work really well. And then, we've got Boardman House, our School of Architecture there, which is, one of the most beautiful interiors, I think, in Norwich, in a functional building. And most recently, we're so proud that we've got our Duke Street Riverside building, which opened only a few months ago. It's new for us, Duke Street Riverside, because we've never done anything before where we haven't been renovating something old. So this was from the ground up and just, a complete imagining of what it could be. And currently in there, we've got our brand new acting course, which is only in its second year with, the most fabulous spaces really to be learning to act. And then this wonderful studio theatre where, where our film students are working. The tech in there is absolutely extraordinary. And, generally the space is really beautiful. I think in answer to your question about how we navigate relationships, I mean, that isn't something that I do for the university. It's been very much Angela's thing that she's done. But also I do think that people follow good ideas. And I think so how we've always been able to sell that is about the vision and the strategy of the university. It comes back down to that again. It comes back down to our kind of core ambition for what NUA has always been in the city, but what it will go on to be and what an important presence it is in the city. And so, hopefully when we make a proposal for a space or a building, people are excited by it because they know what will happen to the regional economy as a result. Because every time we've expanded, whether that's been, going into games or more into our creative software areas or any of these different areas, something good has come out of it for the city in terms of fabulous students coming to us from all over the country and then working with us here to develop their skills and then going into the economy and doing their thing. So, I think it's made the sell easier to the city in that regard. And I mean, gosh, I wouldn't think now, I suppose people who've been in Norwich a long time might think that those areas were once down at heel. I might personally take issue because I had my wedding in Blackfriars Hall in 1994, and I personally feel that it was very much an up-and-coming area at the time. It's always been the most beautiful space, and actually it's probably been, since I've been in Norwich since 1989, it's probably been one of my favourite parts of the city because it has always attracted creative people. We've got clusters of businesses around here. There's a real vibrancy and feel to this part of the city, and that's partly anyway, but it's also the businesses that have come here too.
I mean, I certainly apologise to the city mothers and fathers for any offence caused. I mean, I think it as a testament to what's been done by Newer with the halls of residence, for example. There's like I can't remember what was there before. I honestly can't. I mean, I was driving. I was taking my my daughter to the cinema on the Sunday afternoon, and drove past the halls of residence on the after the St Andrews roundabout, thinking, I don't know what was there before. I couldn't tell you because it's just so striking and beautiful, and well, I find it beautiful. Your mileage may vary, as they say. But there we are. So yeah, absolutely, and I think that Newer is so beautifully placed for that process, and it's a testament to what they continue to do in the city. That so many beautiful facilities.
I would just say there, Mike, one of the things about it is, and I think this is why it's successful in its regeneration, is that they're not just beautiful for beauty's sake. The way that we see it, it's all about the experience of a student coming to study with us. And, if you imagine the journey of that person, they've been probably really interested in art, design, creativity, filmmaking, something like that at school. So they've been mad for it at that point, but they might have been, slightly like a fish out of water. They're probably not part of the sporty crowd. They come to NUA and they need to feel that they've come somewhere really special. And the quality of those buildings and the quality of our environment, I think, is fundamental to them pitching themselves into the world. They come here and they look at it and they think, gosh, somebody's really taken this seriously. Somebody's really put money into these buildings. These are not cheap things that have been thrown up. It's about them coming and thinking, I'm entering an industry where I will be creating value in whatever way in my world and in my creative practice. So I do really think the environment can make people up their game. And that's what we've always wanted to do with it. And, certainly the new building is really like that. I don't think anybody's been in there yet who hasn't come away kind of a bit awe-inspired, thinking, gosh, if you had your time over, would you not want to come and study film or acting here? Because this environment is absolutely amazing.
Absolutely. And ironically, you are not the first person to say that to me this week in other meetings. Newer is, I notice in my research, a frequent name on the shortlist for HE Institution of the Year in the Grads in Games Awards. I think almost it's what I think is better, not so much that you're frequently a winner, but you're always there. You're always in the mix. So that just speaks to a kind of consistency. And the university is no stranger to all success. And I'm sure you know where I'm going with this, because you won a major award from The Guardian in 2019 for a very special game called Profile. And for those people who are living in a cave and don't know what Profile is, tell them, please tell them about Profile.
I absolutely love this project. I mean, it's something I took over careers in the university, careers and employability in about 2016. And at the time, it was like a traditional university careers service. There was a careers advisor and he sat in a room and some of the students went to see him sometimes, and sometimes they'd take a leaflet away with them. But lots of the students weren't engaging in the service. And so we just felt that we needed a complete rethink about how it would work. And so we did two things concurrently. The first thing that we did was that we worked with the businesses in our network and through the creative sector group and said to them, if you could design the most brilliant graduate to come out of NUA to come and work in your organisation, what would they be like? And we worked with, from micro businesses all the way through to BBC in the east of England and, bigger organisations. And I fully expected at that time that I would have a list for film, I'd have a list for games, I might have a list for fine arts. In actual fact, it was a fascinating process because everybody came out pretty much with the same top 10 skills. And so we looked at it and thought, that's really fascinating. There's obviously something about these kind of creative industry positions that these same top 10 skills keep coming to the top. And they're the things that, you'd expect, like, communication skills, team working, ability to take feedback on board, these kind of things kept coming out. So we were sat there thinking, gosh, this information is gold dust for our students. If they could only know about this early enough in their student career, then, they could be working on these skills and evidencing them as time went through. And at the time, we didn't really know how we were going to get that over to students. And then this sort of wonderful light bulb moment came along. We had a speaker who'd come in to talk to our game students at that time from Aviva. He was actually on the main board for Aviva at that time, and he was responsible for user experience design within Aviva. And he was talking about a case study that they had just launched at the time. So this is probably going back to sort of early 2017. And they launched this thing called What is Your Financial Personality? And in short, it was something where it was trying to sell people life assurance. And rather than getting to that point in the conversation about life assurance where somebody in the financial organisation calculates the date of your death, which is always a bit of a negative moment, isn't it? They had come out with this thing with little sort of cartoon figures, and it was a bit like the sort of silly quiz that you might do over a pot of tea around the kitchen table. And it asked all sorts of random questions. And then at the end, it came out and said what sort of financial superhero you were. And then from that, obviously, they went on to sell you a piece of life assurance. And the speaker said at the time, we did this thing because it's not really a game. He said, but if you make something where the clothes are the game and people feel like it's a game, then we think actually you can tip them into a much different sort of a behaviour than they would otherwise be in. And they'd seen a massive sales uplift at Aviva because of this thing. And it was literally like a light bulb going on for us thinking about our profile skills. And it was from that we developed Anyway Profile. And it started as a very simple card game. So it looked like a physical card game. It had the 10 skills in there on different cards, all beautifully designed, of course, because we're Anyway. It was in a box like a card game. And there was all sorts of different games that we developed around it. And we found that by getting the students in the room, by getting them to physically deal the cards out, by getting them to do these sort of card-based interactions, that they became a lot more engaged, that they became much less guarded. So if somebody sits you across the table and says, where do you want to be in 5 years' time? You know, who can answer that question? I mean, I can't answer it now, even in my 50s. So for a student, it's a terrible question to ask them. Whereas over the card game, you could start to get them to envisage where they might be, what their life might look like, you know, what the attributes of it would be. So we knew we were really onto something. We went then from the card game to a board game. And again, it has all the characteristics that a board game has. You know, it has a lovely, well-designed box. It has a board that somebody has to set up. You know, there's somebody in every family who does that, isn't there? Who sets up Monopoly while everybody else nips off to get a drink and a packet of crisps. It's the same with the profile board game, that there'll be one student who wants to put all the pieces out on the board. It has a lid that goes flop when you lift it off like a Monopoly board does. So there's all sorts of physical cues about it that really, really worked. We went from there to having a digital profile. So again, it's got lots of nice little gamey tweaks and bits in it, and our students use it to log themselves on the profile skills. They use it to record the evidence that they have. So when they come to write a CV or a cover letter, it's all there and it's stored for them in a really nice way. And then we also were lucky to win some money from government to create some VR experiences. And in those, again, it's all based around the profile game, but in the VR experiences, the students are in kind of real life settings, whether that's a photographic shoot or selling a piece of animation to a client. And they have to choose different ways to behave as part of that VR game. And it's all about getting them to reflect on the way that they deploy those skills that they're learning when they're in those real life situations. So yes, we were lucky enough to win a prize for it in 2019 for innovation in the sort of employability and entrepreneurship space in universities. And even at that time, we knew that our engagement in careers and employability had gone from 30 to 80% in the university over an 18-month period. So that was the first indication. Now, I've just seen this week the data from the 2020 graduating cohort. So these guys came out in the middle of a lockdown, you know, in a very difficult time for creative industry. And what's interesting is that if you look at the percentage of them getting highly skilled jobs, so these are like good graduate jobs, in 2018, that was at 57%. In 2019, it went to 66%. And then in 2020, it went to 68%. So we've got this sustained record now. We know that it works because it's giving people the confidence and the ambition to actually go for those really good jobs in creative industry that they should be taking. But it's been the most fascinating project. You know, it's been one of the things I've most enjoyed in my career. I think it's been a really, really fun thing. And it makes sense for us because, you know, we're a creative community here. So we should come at things in a slightly left field, you know, the way that creative people would. And so it makes sense for us to do that. But since then, I mean, we've talked to all sorts of people about profile, businesses, schools, all sorts of people have trialed it and are kind of using the principles of profile. I've lost count of the number of packs of cards I've given away, because it's something that we've really felt that we wanted to share across the region and different businesses, because it's just fundamentally a simple, good idea.
Just to follow on from that, if anyone wanted to take advantage of profile, where would they find that?
Oh, just to reach out to me is the best way, because the thing about profile is we could send people all of the stuff. We could send them a pack of cards or a board game. Actually, it comes to life when you see how we use it and what the interactions are. So by far the best way, if there's anybody out there that's interested in pursuing this, is to get in touch with me, and then I'll loan you one of my employability advisors for the morning to come and have a try with it, because it's in seeing the interactions that you know how to make it work. The worst place I had to, and I know, Mike, for you, this was your old world, so not freaky for you at all, but I got called on once to present it at a meeting in the Palace of Westminster. And let's just say that I was slightly freaked out by the whole occasion. The room there with the clock bonging in the background and the green leather chairs with the Palace of Westminster thing on them and everything. It's like, this is not my world. I felt like a fish out of water. I was in a room with only 2 women and 30 men. I was 40 minutes into the agenda, at which point they had forgotten my name and where I was from. And then the chair of the meeting said, there's someone here from Arts University. And the tumbleweed went across the room at that moment as they all sort of sighed, because they were thinking, oh no, we want our lunch and we've got to listen to some wacko from an Arts University. And then so I thought, no, don't be defeated, Sarah. So I got up and I showed them, and I started dealing the cards and showing them how it was. Within about 2 minutes, the jackets were off, they were out of their chairs, and they were making silly jokes about Paul Daniels and Debbie McGee. And it's because we all learn to play when we're children. And by having that thing that looks and feels like a game, it allows people, it enables them to find that much freer behaviour, that much less inhibited behaviour than they would normally in their professional lives. And for me, it was a turning point, because I just thought, if it can work in that crowd, it can work in any crowd. So it sticks in my mind as a kind of a turning point for the project, that I thought, we've got something here. It works with those guys. But fascinating.
The ultimate Dragon's Den. It absolutely. I mean, and I think Newer is, as you say, really at the forefront of encouraging that. And what a wonderful thing to do, to be able to not just be innovative, but to encourage innovation through being innovative, I suppose. And to sort of see that light come on in others. I mean, I suppose I could say I put off being in a creative space for far too long. I wouldn't change anything, but I think that was where this is going back way, but part of my education, and this is a dead giveaway to me having what they call Asperger's, but for part of my education, one of my bits of coursework, I produced a one-man audio drama. I can't believe I'm saying this out loud. Of the life of the sort of the Battle of Britain and the head of fighter command at the Battle of Britain.
Oh, we need to hear this, Mike. We need to hear this. The world needs to hear it.
The world might want to hear it. I believe, unless my mother's listening and can say different, in which case, quiet, mother. I believe no recording thankfully exists to this day. I also did loads of ancillary stuff, including sort of, I even faked coffee stains. Well, I didn't fake them. I actually caused them. Coffee stains on the documentation, that sort of kind of a brochure that went with it. So yeah, and I think I was still at high school at the time. So anyway, thank you ever so much for your time. We're coming towards the end of the interview, and I like to end on a kind of whimsical question. We had Alex Brearley from Forestry England, and my question to him was, when was the last time you climbed a tree? And he could tell me. And then I followed up with, and what kind of tree was it? And he could tell me. George Freeman, I asked him, which MP would you most like to be stuck in a lift with? Because let's face it, Michael Gove has experience, and in the Palace of Westminster, which is famously falling to bits, and I can confirm that it is falling to bits. That's not exactly unlikely. I've done things like, can you choose a piece of, what was your choose a piece of music and things like that. My question to you
Oh dear.
Because we've talked
I'm
about...
worried now.
No. It's all fine. We've talked about gaming, and if you could be any video game character, who would it be and why?
Oh my goodness me.
Or let's broaden it and say any artist, anyone in the creative, any sort of famous creative, who would you be and why?
A famous creative?
Yeah, sort of like Dali or
that is easier, because I do have an absolute favourite, and I don't know whether he's somebody that my academic colleagues, who are obviously much more well versed in the world of the arts than I will ever be, but I would choose David Hockney every time. Yeah. There's something about Hockney's work that just brings me joy, and it's a physical thing. It's to do with the colour. So, you know, when you're in a room of these things, he's got one thing which is it's like a digital piece of work, and it's like the 4 seasons in the same scene in a lane in Yorkshire, close to where he lived at one point. And the colours in it and the vibrancy are absolutely superb. I remember when I went to see the David Hockney exhibition down in London a couple of years ago, that there was a room full of his landscapes, and obviously the colours are really sort of exaggerated and everything. And one of the things that he said about them was, I have to capture this because, yes, I could take a photograph, he said, but the way that I see the world is just better. And I said, that's just so fabulous. So if I could have a day being anybody in the art world, I'd have a day being behind the eyes of David Hockney, because I think I know that I connect especially to the way that he views the world. And yes, to see that for a day would be an absolute treat. Can you make that happen then, Mike?
Well,
do you have these 3 wishes?
By the magic of radio, no. But I will see what I can do. I know some very skilled and impressive people, so we'll see what we can arrange. Sarah, Thank you ever so much for your time today.
Thank you. It's been a lot of fun. Thank you.
Thank you to Sarah, to Sophie Banks and Jordan Goldsmith, and everyone in the Newer family, which is doing amazing work in the creative arts sector for the East of England. Want to know more? Well, take a listen. Robin Milton.
Norfolk benefits from having a really close-knit small business community, and a lot of people are really willing to help out and support you, because I think all of us really value basing our businesses in Norfolk. We love being here. So if other people are looking to start a business or grow it, we want to help them, because that further enriches the local community.
Henry Hoffman.
We originally started in Brixton, London. We were kind of operating out of a basement, which was really great to begin with, but then the pandemic hit and suddenly sort of lost its sheen. We thought of a few different places that we could go to, but Norwich held a special place in our heart because we grew up around here. One of the first things we found is that as a video game studio, everyone was really willing to accommodate us, which you don't really find in London. You're in a sea of competition, so you don't really get that support. So when we came to Norwich, we found the council, co-working spaces, all sorts of business support, meet-up groups, incubators and accelerators, all this sort of thing. We're super excited that we had decided to move our business here and to grow here and to try and get local talent on board as well. We're making a game called Paper Trail, which is a top-down puzzle adventure game set in a completely foldable paper world. And it's coming out on PlayStation, Nintendo Switch, Xbox, PC, mobile, every platform under the sun, essentially.
Josh Davies.
FX Home began 21 years ago now. We wanted to make tools that allow people to become filmmakers and tell a story. Part of what we do is making software, but an equal part of it is teaching people how they can get the best out of the software. And that's all happening here in Norwich. We're also working with Artlist, a company that we had always respected, and for them to recognise what we were doing and then be so brilliant as to invest in this company and invest in Norwich and help us build the team here, it's been a really exciting time. There's a real good reason for why other digital companies should be here in Norwich, and one of those is the talent that the great universities are pumping out.
NUA's course is one of the top 10 courses for games art and design in the world. So being able to draw from that talent, being able to have those graduates and current students part of the Norfolk game developer community is really valuable for us.
Mark Wickham.
We're a part of a specialist arts institution, so the students get to work with like-minded and creative individuals from a range of different disciplines and backgrounds. We believe in the idea that students will have a real breadth of knowledge, but also have a specialist skill set that then takes them forward to become employable and have a real position in the industry. We've had students go on to work in user experience design, app development, QA, production, and we've even had somebody go on to work for Williams F1. Norwich is a great place to live, and what we find is our graduates really want to come back here and work in the city. They sometimes leave because they need to go and find work, but then they dream of coming back here where they belong.
Sophia Giannatasio.
We met in Norwich University of the Arts Games Art and Design course, and we found out that we all really liked working with each other and thought, hey, why not make a studio together too? We then went and took one of the office spaces at the Ideas Factory, which is an incubation hub for graduates that was set up by Norwich University of the Arts. Being based in Norwich specifically allows us to have very good train connections to Cambridge and London, which both have very big games industry support already. But it's a small enough city that it's easier to connect with other studios that might be setting up here. But as a company, it's a city that we love, and that's why we decided to stay in it.
Something that's always been said about Norwich is once you settle there, you don't tend to leave. So people should come here and their companies should come here knowing that then they're going to get loyal people who want to have a long-term future in that company rather than the endless churn that you might experience in a much bigger city. The last couple of years through COVID have been trying for everyone, but actually we've had some of the most exciting times that we've ever had. A childhood dream of mine was to work with Apple, and we actually got to do that. But we're also working with Unreal, who make the best 3D games engine on the market, to try and move forward with virtual production, the idea that you are recording stuff in the camera, it knows where you are positionally, and then you can change out a rendered background. That's also what we were working on with Apple. So yeah, we could do some really amazing stuff here in Norwich, and we're just beginning.
The students that come out of the universities are all excited to develop and grow in the industry themselves. Working with the university has allowed us to keep contact with that fresh mindset, and hopefully we'll be able to provide opportunity to those people as we grow bigger and look for new talent ourselves.
It's just fantastic to see games that were given that first opportunity within Norfolk go on to be so successful, and it's something that I hope to see more of.
You can hear more from Robin Milton on Eastern Promise later this year. If you'd like to see this advert in its visual form, it's available now on the Eastern Promise YouTube channel. Just go to YouTube and search for Eastern Promise, the podcast. And now, it's time for the Magic Guide, where the Eastern Promise community come together for a spell of recommendations in
CROWDSOURCERY.
This week, we're looking at weekend breaks and getaways, so let's cast off with our first crowd sorcerer, Sue Simmons, BT Innovation Showcase Manager at Adastral Park, who would highly recommend the nautical niceties of Hipperson's Boatyard at Gillingham, Beccles. In quite the testimonial, Sue says, simply the best way to unwind. A total gem for either getaway couples or active families alike. Either stay in one of the floating houseboats, do some paddleboarding, or simply muck about on the river. On their great electric boats, rowboats, kayaks, guided river tours, it's simply the best value, says Sue. And you'll feel like you've been away for twice as long as you have, be it for a day, a weekend or more. Run by the wonderful Sparrow family, they're very environmentally focused too. What's better than that, says Sue? It's simply the best. Well, what more can you say? Find out for yourself at www.hippersons, with 2 P's, that's hippersons.co.uk. Another listener, Dr. Penny Hundleby, Senior Scientist at the John Innes Centre, brings us to the Gin Trap Inn at Ringstead in North Norfolk, which boasts on its website, www.thegintrapinn.co.uk, we've been serving farmers, traders, fishermen and smugglers since 1668. Penny says, we had a weekend here with the kids in February. Cosy boutique-style cottages, fantastic food and attentive staff. Felt very bespoke. Best night's sleep ever too. Penny adds she'd like to return when it's warmer, as the outside space looked lovely too. And she's thankful that the play space kept her 2 children entertained before breakfast. Well, from the photos, Penny, it looked amazing. We at Chateau Rigby are taking note. Tom Holmes, Events and Engagement Manager at the Big C Cancer Charity, currently on parental leave and so in direst need of a getaway, writes, Congham Hall in northwest Norfolk is a great place to escape without the kids. Luxurious rooms, delicious food, a great spa and all set in beautiful grounds. There's more to learn at conghamhallhotel.co.uk. Tom has, I'm glad to see, taken aboard my remonstrations about leaving the puns to the experts. I'm actually taking a stand-up comedy course at the moment. Now, that is literally 100% true, and therefore an entirely correct use of the word literally. This course will end in a live show, and also ending that night, I predict, will be my career as a stand-up comedian. In our next instalment, like a well-seasoned chicken, it was only a matter of time. Please share responsibly your top tips for the best pubs and bars in the east of England. I want your recommendations, whether your tipple is cocktails, mocktails, bitter or gin. You may enjoy some pre-theatre drinks in a Cambridge or a Norwich wine bar, fine dining in a Bury St Edmunds or North Norfolk gastropub, or a roaring fire at one of the hundreds of village watering holes across the region. Wherever it might be, let me be your designated driver and take you there. Anywhere in the east of England is eligible. By all means, mention a barkeep or landlady by name, and stories of fun times in the public bar or saloon are at your discretion. Add your suggestions to my post on LinkedIn or Twitter at epthepodcastuk, or email them to me at host@easternpromise.site. I'm taking a short break next week, but I'll be roaring back the week after with the second in our Play Shapers series, looking at Thetford. Prepare for Eastern Promise to take a sledgehammer in sound to your preconceptions. I'll be talking to Councillor Sam Chapman-Allen, leader of Breckland Council, and touring the town in the company of the Greater Thetford Partnership's Jack Weaver. Please do join us. I guarantee it'll be worth your while. Thank you once again to the brilliant Sarah Steed and the force of nature that is Jackie Sadek. Thank you as ever to the Solenoid Sage, Engineer 49. Thank you to my crowdsourcerers, Penny, Tom and Sue, not the name of a 70s folk trio, and thank you most of all to you for listening wherever you are. And that was episode 32 of Eastern Promise. I've been your host, Mike Rigby, and I would love to hear from you by DM on LinkedIn, by email to host@easternpromise.site, or on Twitter at epthepodcastuk. I'll be back in 2 weeks, but until then, bye for now.